Today we're going to be looking at what if civilization started over. Now, firstly, we're gonna be seeing the Wait, I need to see. So today we're going to be looking at the expansion of the new empire. Now, firstly, the new empire will gain territories from the Caucasus over here, reaching to Greece. Which, I mean, yeah, it does look weird in the map, but don't mind that. So basically, they end up getting Italy, and they end up and eventually they end up taking down all of the Arabic influence over here. Now, the reason why they do that is because it is kind of interesting. Now they actually want to be the Islam Empire. However, the problem is that they're not actually, that strong. So in order to be as strong as possible, they need to take most of the world. Not all of the world, because they need to share land and stuff. So yeah. They end up getting all of the Caucasus. Then they end up getting a part of the Nile over here. Meanwhile, let's look at the Brazilian nation over here, where it actually unites all of their lands, creating a whole coastal empire kind of thing. And so basically, we eventually get the a brand new country. Now this country is actually as it turns out is actually in Madagascar. As over the years, finally Madagascar is actually kind of peaceful now, as nuclear waste has kind of went outside of Madagascar somehow. I think they just evaporated. I don't know, but anyways, the Madagascar people, which have been hiding inside of bunkers, have eventually came outside, and they've gotten most of Mozambique. Now eventually they decide to get Sri Lanka, and then they get parts of India. Now the reason why they do that is kind of unknown. They just want to do that, but yeah, they already know about the existence of the new empire. However, they just want to beat them to get New Delhi. Now the old empire knows about the Madagascar empire and they're kind of mad because they want to be the ones who get New Delhi, which they end up getting it. Kicking all of these this whole part over here. Eventually the Madagascar people had to leave Sri Lanka, leaving Madagascar influence around India. Meanwhile, we can see a new nation pop up. This time it's in Australia. Now in Australia, there became a new empire, which as it turns out actually wants to get all of the lands of Australia and a couple lands from New Zealand. So they get their promised territories, however not as much promised territories, as they only just get this amount of land. However, the thing is that since they're actually democratic, which is actually true, the Australians have a bunch of groups that are communist. Now, then a revolution happened. The revolution happened over here, which is pretty close to the capital, which is over here. Now the revolt actually started because a bunch of communist people, which were actually in the north during the nuclear war, actually immigrated all the way to the south, which after the Australian Union was created over here, and they found out that they were actually democratic, they were actually pretty mad. They then got Tasmania, which is a perfect move, as they could just as they could get the southern lands of the Australian Union. Now the Australians are actually pretty mad because now they've lost two of their fronts. Which speaking of fronts, the capital's front got taken down. Now, yeah. However, the government doesn't give up, going to this part. However, both of the rebels over here end up taking as much territory as possible, which they end up meeting over here. Now the government eventually gives up, which gives all of the land to the rebels. Eventually, the rebels come over here, taking most of their original lands over here. So now we can see this whole empire turn great. So yeah, they didn't get Papua New Guinea and just Guinea and just Guinea. And so yeah, they become a huge empire kind of thing. Not really huge, but still pretty big. So they end up calling it quits, and they stop their communist influence. Now actually they kind of do. However, they just stop after some time. Meanwhile, let's go to Cuba, which confusingly they lose most of their territory. Now this is because all of the tribes that were here were starting to rebel. Which means that Cuban influence around the Caribbean and some of the other places are gone. Eventually, Florida becomes the Floridan Republic, which has this kind of color, which spans through this area. Then the Floridan Republic declares war on Cuba, which they successfully do. Now in this treaty, as you can see already, the Cubans end up losing most of their territory. Now this is actually mostly due to the fact that they're actually pretty weak. So yeah. Now, anyways, let's go to Russia, where we can see a nation pop up, which is over here. Now this is the Russians, which are already over here. now they end up getting Estonia and then Latvia and also Lithuania, which they then get their old lands, including some land from Finland. Now their goal is to reunite the Russian Empire as fast as possible before the new empire does. However, it was already too late, as the new empire reached the border of the Russians, taking most of this territory, taking down the Caspian Sea, meaning that the Russians only have one way left to have water, by the Baltic Sea or over here in the Northern Sea, or the Northern Sea. They then get Finland, and they get a nice cold vacation over here to Norway, and then Sweden. Now the reason why they do that is because they want to get access to more water, so that they could get fish and chips or something. So yeah, you know, they want to have they have to want they actually understand their mistakes from history, and they now want to have a fully democratic union, trying to save most of the lands of Russia from fascist. Yes, the new empire is fascist empire. So they end up taking these territories, which then it becomes the First War. Now the Russians end up taking their promised territories. They then reach here, taking these areas, and Now the new empire is kind of broken, because the Caspian Sea is actually pretty important for this place. So yeah. Now the Russians kind of end up taking all of the Caspian Sea, but yeah, they just do that. However, the Russians actually call it quits, because they don't want to take too much of the empire. Now in this treaty, we can actually see some territorial gains from Russia, and interestingly, two new countries. Now the first country is actually the Armenian country, and the second country is the Caspian Sea country. Now the reason why they were created is because they want to be a Caspian Sea buffer zone. So, meaning that the new empire's citizens could go to Russia. However, when they go to Russia, they are not allowed to do any terrorist, moves. So yeah. Which of course it's gonna happen. So then the Russians end up taking these parts over here. And they ended up having a non-aggression pact with the old empire, doing after doing some terrible things and stuff, and now the old empire actually likes the idea of the Russians ending up taking all of this area, which kind of works, as now the Russians take this part. Meanwhile, we can see that the old empire is actually dying a bit out, because the Iberian Union, which is over here, and it actually decides to take down every single Romance language country, or a Romance country, because they want to have Spanish influence around it. And yes, every single war is because of influence, yes. So now the influence of the new empire has been taken down. And now the and you might be asking, well, isn't the Balkans not really romantic? Well, the only thing they're actually focusing on is to both unite the Romance languages and also defeat the the new empire, which is their only goal. Now, I might actually realize some stuff about this. That just looks like some random, Roman, some random Roman emperor that got all of Africa. I mean, not all of Africa, like all of northern Africa, some bits of Europe and the Balkans, of course, and also like this part, so which I already said, including some random islands, over here, and yeah. It's the freaking Roman Julius Caesar. But yeah, basically the Spanish actually want to be like him. So because of that, they end up gaining all of these lands, which they end up meeting with the new empire right here. Now their only goal is to attack them by taking down the Nile, which is successful, taking down these parts. They then get this triangle-looking thing. Me personally, I have no idea what that is, but yeah, I do know that it exists, but I have no idea what the name is called. Now you can actually realize from this map that Asia is pretty populated with countries. However, this part isn't. Also, this part, which reminds me of a certain time where, that was true, but don't mind that. Now the Australians have actually taken most of it. So they got all of it. They got all of the Australian lands, bro. They got all of the Australian lands, bro. So yeah, they get all of the Australian lands, which I've already said like a billion times. And yeah. So that is it for this episode. Now, yeah, thank you very much, and yeah, see you later. Bye.